Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy podcast. Each week, we expose the faulty foundational mindsets of the past and rebuild a newer, stronger foundation essential in creating your meaningful legacy. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get started. As much as you like this podcast, I'm certain that you're going to love the book that I just released on Amazon, Fuel Your Legacy, The 9 Pillars to Build a Meaningful Legacy. I wrote this to share with you the experiences that I had while I was identifying my identity, how I began to create my meaningful legacy, and how you can create yours. You're going to find this book on Kindle, Amazon, and as always on my website, samknickerbocker.com. Welcome back to the Fuel Your Legacy show, and today we have another amazing guest. We actually met or heard each other's story on Clubhouse, and I heard it and I was like, hey, I think he'd be a phenomenal guest for my podcast, and I think that maybe we'll do a trade here and I'll go on his as well. But his name is Michael Bryan, and he runs his own podcast. The thing about Michael is he had a life expectancy of like being 24 and then 29, and basically he has cystic fibrosis, and he finally decided, I'm going to go live the life and have a life of meaning. No matter how many years I'm given, I'm going to go live the life on my own terms. I'm not going to let somebody else define my life for me. And that's why he's on this podcast. There's a lot of information here that we could go into, and I'm excited to really dig into it. But Michael, if you can go ahead and share your story, share kind of just growing up, what was that like? How did you end up where you are now? And what really spurred you onto this vision of what you're creating with your podcast and the movement you're creating?
Well, thanks for having me on, firstly, Sam. I appreciate being a guest on the show. And for me, growing up was a combination of no one really expected anything because of the health conditions. Now, it might seem a bit trivial now, but about 20 to 30 years ago, we didn't know an awful lot about the conditions. It was kind of new. And when my parents had to know as much as the experts did, if they wanted to save my life, essentially, my parents had to go on a crash course pretty quickly on how to maintain my health. Because I also failed to thrive as a baby. So I was in like all the incubators and all that sort of thing. So it was pretty dire from all sort of angles. And the lack of expectation, I guess, or the lack of pressure gave me the freedom almost to do what I wanted. I wasn't forced to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer because an engineer was what my dad was. My dad was an engineer, and he never convinced me or told me to sort of follow in his footsteps. So there was a real sense of that. Now, the downside of that, of course, is I didn't feel the need to push myself down a particular path. I let things like curiosity and what I enjoyed to be my guiding light, if you will, rather than, okay, get a job, make loads of money. That money wasn't the major motivator for me until I realized that I had expensive taste. And I like being able to buy nice things. And then I made the link of the more money I made, the more money I had, the better my life was. And that included health as well. You can eat healthier, you can eat more, you can go to the gym rather than exercising from home. You can do so much more because of how much money I had. And that was a bit of a change moment for me when I was about 16 of you can live better when you've got more money. It was a resource that you could put to good use, right? But then it was also motivated in terms of making money in a particular way. I was able to merge that with, okay, what do you want to do? And it was also at 16 when I had my first glimpse of feeling good by helping people. because when I was 16, I started off as a tennis coach. That was my first experience of business, being a business owner, being my own boss, being an entrepreneur. The starting point was tennis coaching, and I used to coach kids, so like young children, and seeing their eyes light up at 16, the joy on their face when I improved their tennis, that was the starting point for me of, I want to do more of this. I did that. I helped them do this. I helped them achieve that thing. That was amazing. I helped them do that. And that spurred me on to today. I've followed that ever since. Tennis coaching, personal training, online health coaching, doing the things that I do now, from the podcast to the book to a whole host of other things that I've got planned in the future, that all has stemmed from that one moment of helping someone improve and me feeling good because of that. And I've used that ever since.
That is incredible. So were you, what was your family situation? Are you the oldest, youngest, middle child? Like, where do you fall in the line of children?
I was eldest, so firstborn. So now obviously I've got a brother. He's old teens, so he's not quite 20. He's 18, 19, I think, if memory serves. I'm definitely wrong, because he's 8 years younger than me, and I'm 29, so that makes him around 21. He obviously had a better situation than me. He was born healthier, all that sort of stuff, so he's doing pretty well for all intensive purposes. I was the learning experience, if you will, that my parents, my brother was on medication and treatment from day one, because they knew that he would have the same condition as me. Obviously, we weren't aware, as far as I was concerned, until I was about 2 or 3 months old. So I had 2 months of tests and figuring out what was wrong. And meanwhile, I was kind of lying there as a baby, right? So that was the initial start when I was 16. And there's plenty of other stuff that I could talk about if you're open to it. But that was the start.
So with your brother, so both you and your younger brother, you both have the same medical condition. And so I think this is really fascinating to understand that something that, because this happens in all areas of life, we try and project our current day standards of life or expectations or belief systems, religious belief systems, political belief systems, business belief systems, relationship, everything. We say, well, this is what is right today. And unfortunately, right today changes rapidly. And so then we look back and we judge the past off of what our current lens is. And I think that can be false, right? So somebody might say, well, why is this a significant thing that you have overcome your medical conditions? And the reality is, because when it was first happening, they didn't know. They didn't know what was going on. That happens in your relationship, business, so much things has changed. So what, just from a pure medical development standpoint, what changed between the 8 years between when you were born and when your brother was born? What was the difference in resources, 8 years of medical time?
It's an interesting question, because it's not something it's taught enough about. Because I had tests done. I've had things happen to me that I think they still use it for research today. I've had skin grafts taken for tests on things, and there's a lot of medicine now that's recently being released that's having tremendous impact on people. And just from a medical standpoint, because I'm healthy, I don't get access to it, because the benefit to resource ratio is quite low. They haven't got a lot of access to it, but they want to give it to people that will make the biggest difference. There's a difference between me, say, 100% to 110%, to someone that's at 50% taking them to 80%. They're going to give it to the person that can almost double their improvement than someone that's already doing okay. So sometimes by being okay, you actually get access to less than if you're unwell because of the potential upside. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something to be aware of. And this is this may go somewhere that it doesn't have to go. So if you're like, no, I don't want to talk about it, whatever. But I spent 2 years on a religious mission in Scotland and Ireland. So I won't say that I understand and really know the system because I didn't live it. Even though we were over there for 2 years, we still were kind of in an American bubble because of the resources that we had going in. So I understand that my experience is different than the people who grew up there and lived there their whole life. But there is a difference, and denying it is just silly to recognize the difference between socialistic type medicine philosophy and the American model. And I'm not saying one is better, right? Because in the American model, let's say there is somebody who's at 50 and needs to get to 80 and they can't afford it. Well, in America, they don't get it, right? Like it's a no-go, right? In Europe, yeah, you don't ever get from 80 to 100 because they're trying to help the people who are 50 to 80, right? Whereas the people in America, if you have the money, you can get to 80, from 80 to 100 and or 150 or whatever, right? So there's two completely different models. And I think that's important to recognize when he's talking about this over there. It's pretty much like take a ticket, and as long I had people that I knew who was like they had big abscesses on their face and other places, and they would go to the doctor and say, "Hey, can you look at this?" And they say, "Sorry, it's not bleeding. We got to take care of the people who are bleeding," you know. And eventually they, my friends, they actually cut the thing open so they could get it looked at because it was the only way that they would get it looked at because their standard was, if you're not bleeding, they're not looking at it. And in America, we have a similar problem, right? If you go into an ER room and you have like a broken bone and it's just kind of not bleeding or something, then they just say, oh yeah, go take a seat. We'll get to you when we have time, right? You still get helped, but we'll get to you later. But if you run in there and your finger's a little bit cut and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm bleeding, and you're flinging blood everywhere, you get immediate assistance, right? Because they got to keep their workplace clean. So it's a similar thing, but it is fascinating just to hear that because sometimes moving up in mobility actually decreases your ability to get resources that you need. One thing that I like about what you said was that, and I'm gonna tie this into two, but you said the lack of expectation was a gift because it means you have possibility. Well, same thing. Once you get to a certain point of health, you chose, right? Because there's people who see lack of expectation as nobody loves me enough, nobody expects anything, nobody cares enough for me to do anything, so I'm going to sit here and wallow in self-pity, right? There's people who take that approach to the lack of expectation, and then there's people who say, look, I had a lack of expectation. That means I got to go do whatever the heck I wanted and find out what I love doing. And same philosophy, once you get to a certain perspective of health, now you can look at that as like, man, I don't never get to go from 80 to 100 or from 100 to 110. Or you can say, now I get to go, I'm healthy enough that I can go do what I love doing, get the money if necessary to get me there. Rather than count on a system that's never going to get me there, I can go build a life for myself that can get me there. So talk about that. Like, how did you learn, adopt? Did you have somebody mentor you? How did you get to view life that way, where it's just like, lack of expectation is actually a gift that gave me possibility rather than a liability in my life that nobody cared about me? How did you, or when did you choose into that belief system?
I think it's a combination of the lack of expectation and also the freedom to fail and the freedom to take risks. So at the time, don't forget, I was like 18. So I was a student. I had access to university resources. I was still living with my family. So I had like financial support. I had a roof over my head. And I had the ability to go, well, what do you really want to do with your life, Mike? And I had that from 16 years old because I didn't know what I wanted to do either. Wasn't particularly academic. Didn't do a main because in England we've got these. In England we've got GCSEs, right? And I didn't do exceptionally well in those. So I also wasn't good enough to meet high expectations. You go, oh yeah, you push yourself to be a doctor, Mike, and I walk away with like barely passing half of the subjects that I did at school. I also was never actually going to be that smart without a severe kick up the arse and constant work to study for a job that I probably didn't even want to do anyway. I didn't want to be a doctor. So I think there was a lot of that. There was a lot of, well, you've got to do something. We don't know how long you've got left. I think was playing a part a little bit. Parents didn't know how long I had. Never mind me. You know, they're in the know and they're watching me do this and they don't know. There's a lot of unknowns there. And I think being able to navigate that, but while giving me the freedom of attempting, the freedom of trying, the freedom to fail, and also not expecting me to rock the planet, if you will, with whatever I decide to do. So that gave me the sense of essentially throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. And that was something I've not stopped doing. Some of it stuck, thankfully, but that's something that you'll learn as it's something that I wanted to do. I think I'm just built differently to the average person. And I think a lot of it is I was never forced to do anything aside from the health stuff. So I think they exhausted their forcing me to do stuff on the health stuff. I was forced to do physiotherapy, forced to do my meds, forced to do my treatments, I was forced to exercise when I first started because that was one of the main forms of treatment. I was going to the sports classes. I was going to the after-school clubs. I was going to the martial arts classes. I was going to like the kids' fitness classes. Mum was taxi, so she just took me to these things. I was a kid. I was just messing around, you know. So I think there's a lot. It's a lot more complicated than we can probably fit in. But I think my ability to think that way is, again, essentially a testament to the lack of pressure. It's you're not being forced to do it. Yeah, there's a negative aspect. Too many options, right? If I'm given what to do, then great, makes my life easier. So in some ways, it makes things more difficult by giving so much freedom and the support and the safety net. Because it's like, well, okay, well, what do I do then? Up to you. Well, I don't know. Well, it's still up to you. You pick. So it took longer for me to decide because I wasn't being forced. I made a tremendous amount of mistakes, a lot of tweaking. And you know, when you're a business owner and you get mentored or you get coached or you enter the online world, which we're both heavily involved in, there's a lot of talk of self-discovery, finding yourself, knowing what you really want to do, find what you enjoy, find what you're passionate about. I didn't know what I was passionate about. That's the worst piece of advice ever. Because if you don't know, you can't go anywhere. If you don't know yourself, you don't go anywhere. If you're not any particular passions, you don't take step number 2. And that's difficult because how are you supposed to find out if you're passionate about it? How are you supposed to find out? You try. You throw someone at the wall. What do you think? And sometimes it's born out of frustration sometimes. I get very frustrated around the self-improvement space when they give you things that aren't based on this. If you're at ground zero and you're supposed to know what you're passionate about, that's the same thing as being at ground zero at 18 or 16 and being expected to know what job or business you want to do for the rest of your life. There's no possible way you can know that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. It's insane, that pressure that gets put on there. just because of really, really social or society pressures. And then there's a lot of people who are faking it, saying, oh, well, I know what I want to do. Really, they have no idea. They think they know what they want to do, and they aren't aware enough to know that they just think they don't, like, to know that they are just thinking they know what they want to do rather than actually knowing. So I'm curious here, just for the listeners, because not everybody knows what cystic fibrosis is or how it affects your life. Go into a little bit of like, how does it actually affect your daily life? What is it? Maybe don't get too technical with medical knowledge, but like, what is it? How does it affect you? And why is there a life expectancy element to, or why was there? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't now, but why was there then this life expectancy to it?
Okay. It's a good job you added the caveat of not getting too technical, because you can get very technical when it comes to this. In a nutshell, let's try and think of the best starting point. In a nutshell, cystic fibrosis is a genetic condition that impacts on my lungs and my digestive system mostly. I say mostly because they're the main systems of the body. So there's a lot of leeway there, right? It's got more room to do its thing. So, and lungs and digestive system doesn't leave a whole lot else left. If you think about it,
Sure.
If you think what's left, digestive system, lungs, what's left? Not much. So basically what happens is my body overproduces mucus all around the body. Mucus is just like phlegm, right? In a sort of the normal way that we would talk about. My body overproduces phlegm, right? And what happens is that gets hard if it's there for too long. So if you imagine your lungs get clogged up and then it gets hard, you can't breathe. So that's where the life expectancy comes in. Your body essentially gives out. It can't cope with the stress. It can't cope with it anymore. So that's where the life expectancy comes in. Some kids don't make their first birthday and stuff like that, because if it's bad from day one, your body's fighting from day one. And if it's not given the help that it needs, he or she or whatever you want to call it needs, very often if it's a battle from day one, it's not easy at all. And I have a lot of respect for parents, because it's impossible to watch your child go through that and have no idea what to do. And I know how disempowering it is, because I've been on the receiving end of it and been on the feeling like a lab rat scenario. But watching me do it and not being able to do anything is difficult. And I've watched people go through it, and it's not an easy thing. And parents of kids can sometimes have a more difficult time than the child, because the child doesn't know any different. The parents do. It's a very different scenario. But anyway, where life expectancy comes into it is your body basically gives out. And as you get older, the life expectancy for CF used to be about, well, you'd be lucky to make your first birthday. Then as things progressed, as they're able to pick up on some of the triggers, obviously it gradually got to like 45 or something it is now. So you might be thinking, well, where do I get 24 from? Where did I come up with that number? Well, that's because I've also got cystic fibrosis related diabetes. So if you picture the mucus build up, the phlegm build up, getting worse and worse and worse over time, because it's classed as a degenerative disease, meaning it gets worse over time. So as you get older, your body starts to struggle. Your body starts to get tired. And the pancreas is something your body's using constantly. It's like your lungs and it's like your stomach. It's being used all the time. It monitors your blood sugar, right, your blood glucose, your energy levels, and fuels most of your body. It allows insulin to be released and releases energy into the rest of your body. So it's very important. When you're tired enough, your organ can't figure it because can't work in the same way. So it needs help. That's where the insulin comes in. And that's what I have. And because of the, again, degenerative aspect of diabetes, that's where the lower life expectancy comes in, because your body has to work harder from day one. Higher blood sugar affects things like mucus production, circulation, all the stuff that comes along with being diabetic. It's the one condition that doctors don't want to get. That's how important it is that you try to stay away from being diabetic. And I have both. And one of the stories that completely changed the direction of my life, completely, was I had a friend that had the same conditions. He had CF, cystic fibrosis. He was also diabetic. And he unfortunately passed away before I was diagnosed. So I just had cystic fibrosis when he passed away. Then I did all the tests. I fought back. I told them that I didn't have diabetes. I was a personal trainer at the time. I thought, I can manage this. I don't need to be diabetic. I just won't have any sugar. I won't have it. Because I could. It wasn't the most difficult thing in the world. I just won't have sugar. Retest me. I was a stubborn arse when I was at that age. And the nurses were very gracious. They agreed, even though deep down they knew there was nothing I could do. They gave me they amused me, right? They sort of looked at me and went, okay, Mike, we'll let you have your fun, right? That was essentially what the conversation ended like. So I cut out carbs, up my protein, up my fats, up my exercise. I was an absolute demon. I did everything that I could for 5 days to prove that I wasn't diabetic. And I was. Nothing I could do. So I had to sit there, be given the news after one of my friends passed away. And he was only a year older than me. And he passed away. And I sat there and I couldn't cry in the middle of a hospital. Far too proud for that. But I did wonder whether if I kept doing what I was doing for one more year, if I only had one more year, would it be worth it? And the answer was no, I wouldn't. Whether I was tennis coaching, I was personal training, I was starting the online thing, right? It wasn't really a business at that point. I was multitasking between clients and my phone. That was what the online business looked like at the time. And I wasn't happy with it. I wasn't happy with the answers. Would it be worth it? Would I be happy if I could see myself now? Would I be proud of it? Would I be proud of what I'm doing with my time, with my life? And no, I was playing too small. I wasn't happy. I was nowhere near the standard that I wanted to be at. And it completely shifted. I stopped personal training because that was the more time was being spent doing that than doing the tennis. So I could do the tennis, get by, and then not do the fitness, and I'd have an extra 4 to 5, at least between 3 and 4 full days to myself where I could work on some of the bigger impact, make my life worth it type projects that I'm still doing today. And that's going back years now. But that spurred me on to start my podcast. I got my first media coverage, which was the first glimpse that my clients knew that I had these conditions. So I'd spent a long time coming across as if I had nothing wrong with me. That's how I wanted. I didn't want to be treated differently. I didn't want to be given an easy road. I wanted to be seen as amazing without anyone knowing that I was starting from a lesser place. But as soon as my clients found out, they put their ideas up. They worked harder. They're like, oh, if Mike can do it, I've got no excuse, right? And they got better results, bigger results. I was surprised at their results. Nothing else had changed. They probably just stopped lying to themselves about what they were doing and what they weren't doing. But it's then that I realized that me being myself was enough. I didn't have to be an expert. I didn't have to be this rock star of the online world to be seen as valuable, to be seen as not important, but impactful, influential, helpful. I didn't do it for me. I realized that by me living in a way that allowed other people to live their way, that made all the difference to me. So I started my podcast to give other people the opportunity to do the same thing, to be themselves, share their story, because they were enough as they were as well, not just me. And I did it. I needed the proof. I couldn't just take my client's word for it. I didn't believe them. I thought I was the worst in the room everywhere that I went. Everywhere that I went, because I had these health conditions that put me in potentially the worst position I could be in. I genuinely thought I was the worst. I was in the worst position everywhere I went. And to be able to convince myself of otherwise was a long journey. And the podcast was the start of that. The book changed my perspective completely. And to this day, I'm doing better than ever. I'm healthier than ever. And I mean, it wouldn't say it defined me, but my conditions held me back. It didn't define me, but they're there. It's a real thing. It's not a pretend thing. Conditions are real, right? It's not, ooh, I'm afraid to fail. That's not quite true, though, is it? Mine's a bit more real than that. And while I still have them, while they hold me back a couple of days a month, I probably have a bad day. They don't define me anymore, and I can do what I want. I'm the same as everybody else. And I want to give people the opportunity to realize that they can do it as well. You've just got to find what makes you unique, find what makes you you. And that instantly just compounds your value, because you're the only person that can tell your story and live your life the way you do. And that in itself is valuable. And I'm extremely proud and grateful that I get messages from people that are chasing what they want for the first time ever. I didn't want to be a leader. I wouldn't call myself a leader. That's what people have started to see me as. And I had to embrace it because it was given to me. I didn't want it. I didn't expect it. I didn't do any of those things. I didn't do it for that. I mean, to this day, it's become a nice thing to have. You know, it's nice to get the messages. It's nice to have my old school teachers being amazed that I wrote the book, you know, being proud that I shared what I shared. And it's been a wild journey. But unless you can understand that I'm also human as well, because again, it comes with a lot of responsibility and pressure that I'm thankful that my conditions trained me to be ready for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is the key, is always focusing on what are the blessings in the situation, and not doing it for the wrong reasons. And the funny thing is, you can't lie to yourself, right? You couldn't pretend that your conditions are not. You can make it look like on the outside that your conditions aren't there, but on the inside your conditions are there. And I think that oftentimes as third-party viewers, we should be walking around not necessarily assuming that people have issues, but kind of at the same time treating everybody as if. So I think it's a Jim Rohn quote, but he said, treat everybody as if they're struggling, because 99% of the time you're going to be right. right? Rather than treating people as if everything's great in their life, treat everybody as if they are struggling and they need help. And 99% of the time, you're going to be right. And I think that allowing yourself to be treated that way is a huge, that's a huge step in willing to accept help, willing to share your story, willing to allow people to see some of those things that you know all about and you know are, or you believe are weaknesses inside your heart just because of experiences. They're actually strengths. So I think that is huge that you've been able to become a leader and remain humble and consistent there. And just as a listener, think about yourself. What if you came to the realization you only have a year to live? Like, what would you do differently? That's the purpose of this show, fueling your legacy and choosing to live today the way you want to be remembered. Don't think, oh, well, I'll do it later. When I'm 50 to 65, this is how I want to be remembered. Like, start living today the way you want to be remembered, with the values, the interests, the way you behave and the way you treat others. Like, start living today the way you want to be remembered. And that's why we're talking about legacy, because you never know when the jig's up. You never know when your time has come. I was talking to a client this morning, and he mentioned that somebody in his town, their child died at 3 years old unexpectedly. Right? It's like, are you undervaluing the experiences you could have with your children and spending time with them because you're chasing the money, you're chasing the income, you're trying to find that stuff? Or are you saying, you know what, how do I want to be remembered? And that's what you're focusing on. Because none of us know. In my hometown, many people died unexpectedly. One of probably, I think, the most notable person who died unexpectedly was the wrestling coach in our town. He was loved by people all over the state. Everybody knew him because he was the best wrestling coach. We had the best wrestling team. He went camping with his family one weekend and didn't wake up. He had a heart attack and didn't wake up. And it's like, he was 35, something like that, maybe 40. He was not old. There was no indication that would have happened, but overnight, it can just go. So think about that. Are you living? If you had 1 year left to live, what would you do differently? And what's holding you back from just saying, you know what? I can survive on my tennis income. I can survive on this little amount of income, and I'm going to go build the life that I actually want to do. I want to go build an impact. I want to go create a life that I've only dreamed of because I may only have a year left to do it. Like, what could you really accomplish if you only had a year left to accomplish it? As far as a legacy. And then in your case, right, if it continues, if that year turns into 2 years and into 3 years and into 5 years and into 10 years, are you still going to be satisfied with it? Or do you keep making those adjustments? And I think that's such an important process to really go through in our lives. If somebody listening to this wanted to reach out to you and either be coached by you or just have a conversation and pick, like, I hate the word picking your brain, but like, find out the way you think, right? Because we only have so much time here to have that conversation, but maybe they have this thing that they're going through in their life and say, how would he deal with this, right? Where would they contact you? How would they get a hold of you?
The best place to find me is on social media. So I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and the handle is the Michael Bryan. And I also have my sort of legacy project, if you will, which is my podcast, which is the Ask Mike Show. And it's a bit of a Q&A podcast. You can find that pretty much wherever podcasts are. So from iTunes to Google to Amazon to Stitcher, you name it, my show's on there.
Awesome. And definitely you can go find him on Clubhouse as well, and then have a direct conversation with him if that's of interest to you. Honestly, it's such an amazing tool, what we've been given, social media, any social interaction, and internet, and just technology as a whole. Everything is so incredible that we're able to have these conversations, and I'm grateful for that. So this next section is called Legacy on Rapid Fire, and 5 questions, a 1-word, 1-sentence answers. You ready to go?
I am. Let's do it. Fired up.
Perfect. So what do you think is holding you back from reaching the next level of your legacy today?
The ability to go forwards understanding that I could always go back if I need to.
Okay. And what is the hardest thing you've ever accomplished?
Moving abroad.
And what's your greatest success to this point in your life?
Becoming a international best-selling author, and my podcast hitting the top 50 in the charts.
That is incredible. If there was one secret habit, mindset, or behavior that you believe has contributed the most to your success, what would that be, and how could we implement it into our lives?
Having the freedom to fail, and the best way to do that is to create the safety yourself. Don't wait for it. Proactively create it. Financially, whatever the case is, you can, if you create it, and then give yourself the space to chase what you want.
I completely agree with that. I think it's an undervalued thing. So what are one or two books that you believe would contribute most to the Fuel Your Legacy audience?
The first one would be The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield. Talks about resistance with writing, but I think the principles can be applied to everything. And then Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. It's a book that completely changed how I saw conditioning and how I saw culture. And it's one of the books that actually made me realize just how different I am from the norm. Because when I read the book and I was like, oh, but I understand those things. When you read the book and it's like, but yeah, that just makes perfect sense. And I actually used to have a joke, a bit of a side note. I had a bit of a joke with one of my friends. She's also thinking similarly to me. Used to have a joke of like being around normals, right? In inverted commas. And we realized just how different we were. It was like, oh, what are you up to? I'm walking with normals. I was only going to the shop around the supermarket, but you can hear conversations about like little things that are frustrating people. And I'm walking past going, I don't even think about those things.
It's so true.
Definitely opened my eyes to the way society is made. And I know you're sort of on a bit of a religious path yourself. So Outwitting the Devil, I'm sure, would be a good read if other people are that way inclined as well.
Yeah, no, that book is phenomenal. I would say listen to it on Audible because they have like voice actors, and it's way better than reading it. Reading it's good, and you should like if all it is reading it. I think it's a textbook for like how not to be wasting your time in life. But the audio is, it hits the spot perfect. It is awesome, the voice actors of it. So love the book. And what is the name of your book? Because your book should be in the top here as well.
Well, my book is My Introvert Journey to Be Invisible. So I'm very introverted. Every personality test I ever do, there is a personality test that everyone seems to be raving on about. The one with like you end up with letters and numbers or something afterwards to define your personality type. I got like 97% introvert, like 3% extrovert. I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I don't want to go out. I don't actively search for conferences. Perfectly happy with my own company. My limit sometimes socially is walking around a shop. Being around enough people, but my head goes, oh, I can't wait to get back home. That runs through my mind sometimes. So, yeah, I'm a definite introvert. I've had to overcome a heck of a lot, including my conditions, to be able to do what I'm doing. If you want to know more about me, my story, what I've overcome, that book is like a deep dive into my brain as to how I've done it.
Awesome. I love it. Yeah, definitely go pick that book up. So this is a final question because we're going to pretend that you actually have died. You've passed on, and maybe you have kids, maybe you don't, but we're just going to pretend we're 6 generations from now. People are sitting around the table discussing your life, the impact you had, and the legacy you left. What do you want them to be saying about your legacy 6 generations from now?
I want them to still to be able to go and see what that legacy is. Whether it's a statue whether that's my tombstone. I want them to be able to see it, and I want it to read, "The world is better because I was here."
I love it. Yeah, I think that's so huge. And from what I know of you, listening to you on Clubhouse and now talking to you in person and reviewing some of your posts and things, I really believe that that's going to be said of you, right? And the bigger and bigger that message gets, the more and more that will be said, and the more people will be able to hear that of you and your story. So thank you so much, Michael, for sharing your story with us and sharing your knowledge. Super, super appreciate it. And maybe we'll do this again sometime, because this is fun. I love the conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for that, Sam. Thanks for the kind words as well.
Yeah, no problem. And we'll catch you guys next time on the Fuel Your Legacy Show. Thanks for joining us. If what you heard today resonates with you, please like, comment, and share on social media. Tag me, and if you do give me a shout out, I'll give you a shout out on the next episode. Thanks to all of those who've left a review. It helps spread the message of what it takes to build a legacy that lasts. And we'll catch you next time on Fuel Your Legacy.